Well, hey, thank you so much for checking this out. We are thrilled that you're joining us for our online experience here at Eastern Hills. We know that if you're thinking about checking out church or thinking even about looking at it online, it can feel a little intimidating, and maybe parts of it don't feel like they're created for you to experience online. And our intent is that this does. And so you're going to have some hosts that interact with you in real time. As you comment, they see, and they're going to interact back with you. And then we're going to kind of step in together to a song together that you can listen to. Maybe if church music is not a totally normal thing for you, something easy to experience one of and just get a sample for. And then you're going to hear a talk about what it means to incorporate faith and the way of Jesus into your life. And then after that, you're going to come back to those hosts and have a chance to actually hear their perspective, ask questions, offer your thoughts as well. We hope that God uses this in your life to take maybe what has felt distant, disconnected, or unhelpful in whatever way church has been led to you and make it a little bit easier to connect with today. Thank you so much for joining us. We hope God uses this in your life today to make a real difference.
and welcome to the studio, Eastern Hills Online Experience. We are so glad that you are joining us this morning. I'm Lisa. This is Dustin, and we just want to thank you. If you are a veteran that has served in our military, we just want to thank you this Veterans Day weekend for your service. And if you are a family member of someone who serves, thank you too for your sacrifice. We just appreciate so much what you all have done for our country. So Dustin, we love to kick off the morning with a question. And so today's question is, what do you usually listen to in the car? You can see we've got the chat up behind us. You can drop your answer to that question in the chat, but what do you usually listen to in the car? Dustin, you get the first say here.
Yeah, I usually have a good mix of stuff. Different playlists, artists, podcasts, yada yada. But this weekend, Taylor Swift, Red album, re-released Taylor's version. So that's been on repeat.
Yeah. If you didn't know this about Dustin, Dustin is a big Taylor Swift fan.
Swiftie, as they say. That's that. It's good. She's good.
Okay,
She's
I'm
good.
Sorry, I didn't mean to laugh
She's
at that.
good. No, it's fine. I mean, it's just, it's good.
All right.
What about you, Lisa?
Yeah, for me, I love to listen to music, so I've always got the radio on in the car. I love most genres of music, so I just don't discriminate. So it's really good because it doesn't matter what station I hit. It could be 90s rap, it could be today's music. We can throw it all the way back to, I love the 60s. My grandma taught me to appreciate some 40s stuff. So, you know, I can really hang with the radio these days.
That's great.
Yeah, it's good.
I love
it.
Good. Well, drop your answers in the chat. Would love to hear from you, what you listen to. If you say podcasts or music, tell us what kind of music. Tell us what kind of podcast.
Don't leave
We'd
us
love to hear from you.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so we've got some answers. Anthony says lots of times nothing. This is my husband, and I can tell you this is a miserable experience when there is nothing on in the car. I mean, luckily I've always got a song going in my head, so I can kind of bop along to my own beat, but it is rough. And then he says podcasts or sports radio.
And Anthony listens to boring podcasts.
Yeah, nerdcasts.
Yeah. So I know that about it. He says NPR a lot of the time, so
it's tough sometimes.
Yeah.
Every now and then, he does say if strongly requested by passengers, he will put on some music, but
only
and
under
there
duress.
Are rules on the music. It's just a tough time.
Yeah. Constitutional audit says my wife. That's actually that's fair. That's a fair assessment.
Good. Yeah.
Sometimes I have to turn the music down, and she's
and
she
he
wants
says
to
he's
say
a captive
some stuff.
audience.
Yeah.
So I mean, he's got that going for him.
Yeah.
It's good. All right. Anything else?
Liz Jaraki, Spotify, really loud.
Really loud.
Nice. You're one of those people.
Yeah. What do you listen to on Spotify, Liz? Curious minds.
Yeah, interesting to know. Hey, if you're new here or you're just checking us out for maybe the first or second time, we'd love to have you connect and help answer any questions that you might have. You can scan the QR code on the screen or click the link in the description and fill out that connect card. We would love to get you connected, help you take a next step, and answer questions about Eastern Hills.
Yes. And anything that we talk about, whether it's here in the studio or once Phil starts his message, you can find those resources at ehills.org/weekend. That will be your one-stop shop for everything that you need to know. All right, we actually asked our staff this question, and we asked you at the top, what do you usually listen to in the car? Drop your answer in the chat. Matt, our family pastor, he said driving to work, because he lives kind of far away, an audiobook. And then he says, any other time, Spotify.
Yeah, there you go.
It's good.
There you go.
Phil took his message away, so he must just not want us to know.
Yeah, he said, and then he's like, ooh, shouldn't have said that. Nice. Debbie in the chat says audiobooks or Broadway channel.
Oh.
That's interesting. The only musical I've really listened to is Hamilton.
Okay.
But I've listened to it pretty thoroughly.
That's
so
good.
It's good.
That's good. I do know someone who likes to listen to musical show tunes pretty frequently.
Yeah,
so,
that's
there's
fun.
That.
That's a good way to go.
Kelsey also said nothing. Nothing.
Here's what I think. If you listen to nothing in the car, there's a word that describes you, and that word is sociopathic. That's my perspective.
I don't think that's quite right, but it feels almost. Because, what are you thinking about?
Yeah.
What is so important in your head that you can't listen to?
Are you praying? Probably not. I mean, maybe.
You just made a lot of judgments.
I mean, maybe.
You definitely made a lot of judgments.
I mean, maybe. Who knows?
I don't know. I don't know.
Anthony's calling me out. He says lies and falsehood. I listen to great podcasts. Okay. They're just nerdy podcasts. That's all.
Yeah,
so you just got to know that
I guess
that's where
he likes what he likes.
Anthony's
He likes
at.
what he likes.
Yeah.
Liz also says the radio. Then she says if it's the morning on a weekday, I love the Mind Bender on 100.3.
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh,
I
that's
don't
good.
like to listen to people talk. I want to listen to people sing. So I'm usually like trying to skip through. So it's a little rough sometimes on the radio, but you figure it out. You maneuver through.
But listen, Lisa, I've got something that you need to hear. And maybe if you're watching and you listen to the radio, you need to hear it too. You can get Spotify, Apple Music, these streaming services, and then you don't have to listen to the radio anymore.
Oh.
You can actually just pick the band or music that you want to listen to.
Yeah, but here's the thing, Dustin. That all costs money. Like, I've got Spotify, but it's the free account, and I'm still listening to ads.
Yeah.
So I might as well just do, like, radio roulette and see what happens. You just scroll through, keep going.
But
You just never know. It's like a surprise.
Well,
every time.
yeah, but
Yeah.
man, like, what if do you ever want to listen to a certain song?
Oh, for
You're like,
sure.
oh man, I really want to listen to this.
Sure.
You can't.
Right.
So, but you could,
What, for like $10 a month?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
don't
that's
know.
well worth it.
It
That's
feels
well worth
like
it. Oh
it feels like my
gosh.
husband might chime in on that.
Yeah. Maybe.
Yeah.
We'll see. Anthony, weigh in.
Hey, if you think it would be worth it for the Alvinos to get free what is it? Unlimited Spotify.
Unlimited Spotify Premium, family,
Just
totally
say
worth it.
go ahead.
You can all have
Give
it.
Give it a thumbs up. in
There's
the chat.
podcasts on there, Anthony. So, boom.
Yeah, it's good.
All
right.
Luke Forrester, did we say this? He said
No.
audiobooks, lots and lots of audiobooks. That's great.
I love audiobooks, but I'm always curious what people listen to.
What kind of books?
Yeah, yeah.
Specifically. That's good.
I find on long road trips, if you're listening to an audiobook, the best kind of audiobook is some kind of mystery that kind of keeps you not falling asleep.
Yep.
Yeah, that's
Yep.
good. Well, yesterday was Saturday, and we had been talking about our Thanksgiving food program called Mountain of Mercy. And yesterday, about 300 volunteers showed up. We packed over 870 boxes to give out to families in our community, which when we total that up, it's about $50,000 worth of food. And so we just want to thank you. If you were a part of that in any way, whether you volunteered sometime or you dropped a bag of food off, just thank you so much for participating in that. It makes a huge difference for those families this Thanksgiving.
Yeah. And then this weekend, we're actually kicking off Christmas Store. And if you haven't been here for a Christmas store before, they are amazing.
Yes.
Such a fun opportunity to serve our community. We set up basically a giant toy store in our church, and families get to come and shop for gifts at very reduced prices, which provides a hand up for those families who just want to give their kids presents on Christmas, and also gives them the dignity of being able to say, hey, your mom bought these presents, your dad bought these presents for the family. And that's just such a fun way to get to serve our community. So pick up a gift. You can find a list of the gifts that we need at ehills.org/weekend and drop those off by the 5th of December.
Yep.
And then you can also, if you want to sign up to be a shopper, we have people to go with those families, help them shop, make sure they get the right gifts, or you can bring snacks and treats and kind of make the environment fun. There's a lot of cool ways to serve, and we'd love for you to be involved.
Yep, it's a great opportunity. So ehills.org/weekend, you can hit Christmas Store and find out more information there. At the top, we asked you, what do you usually listen to when you're driving in the car? Sonia, our executive pastor, says all the things. And then she says on the radio, Bobby Bones show on the way to work. Then she says sports talk radio in the afternoon in Bronco season, and then Spotify or podcasts all the other times.
There you go.
That's good. I mean,
There you
she's
go.
like running.
She's got everything.
She's got the range. Yep.
And see, she uses the radio when it's helpful, and then switches to Spotify. So I'm just saying.
It's helpful.
I think that's a vote.
know.
I think that's a vote for Spotify.
Okay.
Just saying.
All right.
Just saying. Should we ask our second question, Lisa?
could,
Okay,
absolutely.
so we've got another question as we kind of lead into the message this weekend. Phil's going to talk about this a little bit right at the top, but what's your most memorable Christmas gift fad?
Yeah.
Like you know what I'm talking about? Like Tickle Me Elmo. For me, personally, my answer, Furby. I wanted a Furby so bad, and I actually have kind of a traumatic story about it. Like
Yes, you do.
my parents got me a Furby because I wanted it, and then they came to me like a couple weeks before Christmas, and they were like, "Hey, it was whatever our church's version of like the Christmas store was. They were like, there's this gift drive. We're giving away all these presents for kids. all three of your siblings, do you guys want to give away your Christmas present? Dustin, we got you a Furby. Would you like to give that away to a kid who really needs it? And I was like, no, absolutely not. I would not.
This kid really needs it.
Yeah. So
That
what's
is
your
traumatic.
Yeah, what's your fad? What's your favorite Christmas fad?
For me, I was trying to think. I think the right answer in my generation is Cabbage Patch dolls.
Oh yeah, okay.
But I don't ever remember it being tricky to get whatever it was that we wanted, which leads me to believe that my sister and I didn't ever want what everyone else wanted.
You were countercultural.
Yeah, I feel like the year that Cabbage Patch Kids were the thing, I wanted Get in Shape Girl.
What's
activity
that?
Things. Oh, Dustin. Oh my goodness.
What's Get in Shape
It came with
Girl?
a cassette that would work you out with music, of course.
Wow.
And then it was depending on what kind of workout you were doing. So if you were doing rhythmic gymnastics, it came like with a ribbon.
Oh.
Yeah, and like a little thing that you could throw in the air, like a hula hoop type thing.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's
it
cool.
was. And then you got the outfits. You had the leg warmers. We've got some stuff. So, it was lots of fun. But it wasn't what everybody else wanted.
Yeah. Well, that's okay.
It's fine.
That's okay.
We made it easy for my
We're
parents.
talking. That's what Phil's going to talk
Yeah,
about today.
yeah.
How to, go against the systems.
I was
in the
bucking
world.
the trends. It's good.
Yeah,
I was
yeah, you
already-
were. That was really.
Yeah.
That was good.
You're welcome. You're
That was
welcome.
good. Even child Lisa knew.
Yeah.
Liz
here says Atari 2600. It had a joystick.
Ooh, that's cool.
Snazzy.
Yeah, I like that. Atari.
All right. Well, if you've got answers to what was your best Christmas fad, go ahead and drop that in the chat. Last week, Phil started our new series called Hope for Exiles. And he talked last week about our flesh. And we can look at our flesh and we kind of think like, oh, what I want is what I want. And that's true. But what we were learning last week is that what we want isn't always God's best for us. And so our flesh is kind of fighting sometimes with our spirit as to what is actually best for us. And then this week, Phil's getting ready for week 2. Then Dustin, he's going to be talking about something different this week.
Yeah, so this week Phil is going to be talking about the kind of systems of the world and the pressure that comes from the way the world is designed. And a lot of times, almost always, those systems are not designed to connect us with God. And if we're not careful, we can kind of follow the path that the systems lay out for us. That's political parties, that's organizations that have influence in the world, that's entertainment industry. All of that is pushing us away from God, and it's going to take intentional work to create systems that are going to bring us closer to Him.
Yep. So if you feel like that's kind of timely and relevant, you're going to definitely get a lot out of this message. It's going to be a little hard sometimes to hear what Phil is talking about because we have our preferences and we have the things that feel good for us. And there are the times that we just kind of want to be in what we're in. And yet God is always calling us to something that's maybe not what the world is calling us to. So that's going to be a great message from Phil. Did we get, I think my computer had a little bit of a glitch, so I apologize if you're trying to drop some things in the chat.
You're in the clear, Lisa. You're in the clear.
Yeah, my computer right now says offline.
Yeah, something happened.
Like
it's
you're
impossible
like,
to
is
say.
this pre-recorded? Nope, it is. It is live and happening right this very minute.
Yeah, but in all seriousness, Phil's message today, we got a chance to listen to it as a staff on Thursday, and let me just say there's some serious stuff that he's going to talk about. And if you are kind of challenged by it today, I would just say take some space. Think about it. Give yourself some time to really work through it yourself and ponder what it looks like to embrace some of the stuff that Phil is talking about this weekend.
Yeah, that's good. One of the things that we talk a lot about is taking what we hear and then applying it and figuring out what does it look like to take one of those things. So as you're listening, kind of be thinking for something that you want to continue to think about and process through, not just today, but throughout the week and maybe for a few weeks. But we are actually getting ready for that message. We're going to drop in right there. Remember, Dustin and I are going to be here at the end of the message with some final thoughts, so make sure that you stick around for that. We've had a ton of fun this morning. Thanks for engaging with us. It's always better with you. And welcome to week 2 of Hope for Exiles.
Good morning and welcome. We're so glad that you're here, whether you're joining us on campus or you're with us online. We are continuing a series this weekend called Hope for Exiles. And we're talking about the tension that we feel in probably a growing way, if you're a follower of Jesus, of what it means to follow him and to feel like some things inside of you, like we talked about in the flesh last week, are pulling you in a different direction, that there's a world around us we're gonna talk about today that's kind of pulling us in different directions, and then we'll have one more next week as well. I hope that as we examine kind of what's been referred to as the unholy trinity, the real enemies of our faith, that you're beginning to take a greater focus for what you might be able to do about that. I also want to make sure you know, not to be awkward or have multiple family meetings. We talked last week, if you're a part of Eastern Hills and you call Eastern Hills home, about how our budget works. And we are currently about $100,000 behind where we expected to be financially. And I invited you, if you want to be a part of that solution, you've been maybe waiting for kind of an invitation or clarity about what it might mean to get involved, you can go find out more information and sign up at ehills.org/weekend by clicking the Give button. This week, there's also a section in there that you can find for our annual report that's releasing this weekend. We produce one of these every year, and it just shows you where the generosity of so many people that call Eastern Hills home, where their generosity has shown up in the last year and how God has changed lives through so many different environments. And so thank you so much. If you call Eastern Hills home, check that out and be encouraged by what God has done through your generosity. And if you're on the fence and you're thinking about it, man, this might just be the perfect time to engage in our last couple months of our calendar year this year. Before we get started, I'm gonna pray for us. And if you've never been here before or never heard me speak, I pray kneeling. And as we talk about these enemies that are really big and difficult, our hope is bigger because our hope is in an eternal God, but we need his perspective. Last week was like a lot of, hey, here's some stuff to do. Here's some practical things you can do. This week is gonna feel a little bit more like, sometimes if you're about to work out, you do like some physical gymnastics to be able to stretch a little. Mentally, maybe just work on your temples a little bit, because we're gonna challenge some ways that we think and hopefully give you some context for what you're seeing in the world all around you. Would you pray with me? God, you tell us that if we come before you and that we ask, that you will give us wisdom. And we pray for that right now. Wisdom to navigate a world that is increasingly distant from any version of what it means to know and follow you. Help us, God, to walk that line well, to communicate your love in a world that so desperately needs it. It's in Jesus' name, amen. Doesn't it seem kind of crazy that here we are, like middle of November, experiencing one of the best fall from a weather perspective that I've ever experienced in my life, by the way. And in just a few weeks, especially if you have little kids, you are going to find yourself scrambling to find that toy that your kids have to have this Christmas, right? Maybe it's like a Pokemon thing this year or a Playhouse. I was old enough to remember some of these things when I was looking around this week, some of the stuff that you just think like nostalgically. And what's interesting about fads is, especially when you get one of these really popular items, you actually don't know how good it is until you've gone crazy to find it and overpaid for it. It could be terrible. You'll have no idea, right? And so we kind of navigate that, but only experience its value after we've sort of already embraced the fad. And the thing is, the fads of our moment culturally right now really revolve around a singular vision for life that removes faith in God from the goal of our society. That's what's happening. And this is uniquely a perspective about the West, although I think some of these trends are happening more than just in our nation. But I wonder, have you seen signs like these on someone's lawn before? Maybe you've seen one and you're like, man, how do I process that? Like as a follower of Jesus, you're like, I don't agree with all of that, but there's some of it that I do. And some of it, I think they're using some of the same words, but they mean something different. And there's this idea, there's this thing that's been referred to as the secular creed of what it means to say, this is what it means to pursue God in a world without God, a different God. And I would encourage you that today, you're gonna be challenged a little bit, kind of no matter where you sit. Today, we're gonna talk about systemic sinism, Jesus' political party, gods that we made up, religious rental counters, and how to quit whining regardless of your political preferences. That's what we're gonna talk about today. And so if you're already mad, here's what I would encourage you to do. Just pull out your phone, start an email. My email is phil.eubank@ehills.org. And you can just put in subject line one of those emails, and then in the just work on it right now over the course of our time together. I do want to recommend a book, though, sincerely, if you're looking at that and you go, how do I process that? How do I think about that? How do I have a nuanced conversation with someone that believes some things I don't believe and I don't think Jesus holds to? There's a really good book called The Secular Creed by Rebecca McLaughlin, and I would encourage you to check this book out. She does a fantastic job of talking about each one of these things from a biblical lens. She is herself same-sex attracted and kind of walks through what it's looked like for her to grow through that and to walk out what she believes to be the Jesus version of sexuality. And so if that's helpful for you, take a look at that. Now, none of this is new. We're experiencing a pattern of brokenness that writers in the Bible refer to as the world. And just like last week when we talked about the flesh, we have to be careful because the word in the New Testament, written originally in Greek of cosmos, does not just refer to what we're going to talk about today. It can refer even to the physical planet that we're on. But there is a version of this word and the way that gets used that is much more damaging and dangerous. And so the author of the book I mentioned last week, John Mark Comer, he defines the world this way. He says it's a system of ideas, values, morals, practices, and social norms that are integrated into the mainstream and institutionalized in a culture corrupted by the twin sins of rebellion against God and the redefinition of good and evil. And if you're like, what were we going to talk about at lunch after this? Now you know, just take a picture of it. It takes some processing, but I think one of the things that this can be encouraging about as we look as exiles, as followers of Jesus in a world that's significantly distancing itself, is what does it mean to us just understand, oh yeah, this is why it feels this way. This is what I'm experiencing. We say this all the time around here that we believe Jesus makes life better, and we really do believe that. Jesus calls it the abundant life. But you will be reminded over and over again in this series that, well, Jesus promises to make life better. It is not going to be easier. As a matter of fact, part of finding hope for us is to realize that in a world that wants less and less to do with God, that following Jesus will be better, but it is going to get harder and harder, but it is worth it. As a matter of fact, oftentimes in our world right now, the challenge is to not conform and take the easy way out. The easy way in our moment is to make our problems all political, to hide behind parties and politicians who make big promises they can never deliver on. It's been said that politics in America is our new national religion, and I would agree with that. On the progressive side, politically, it's even in the name, right? They think that these policies will help society progress by tipping the scales, by balancing them and setting things right, often through entitlements and new government spending. On the conservative side, they think that conserving or holding on to the things that we have and the things that we have had is a better plan and a better role for government to take. There is a worldview that sits behind both of those. But here's the thing about our world's operating system. Our world's operating system requires our rejection, not just an election. And I want to make sure you hear me clearly. I'm not saying you shouldn't vote. I'm not saying you shouldn't be involved and informed. You should be. But you should understand that your true citizenship, if you're a follower of Jesus, is not found in the United States. You can be thankful for this place. You can appreciate veterans like we did this week and recognize that this nation will never be your eternal home. And there's some reasons for that. It starts by us identifying systemic sinism in our world. We're going to talk about that in just a minute. Have you ever brought somebody to church, though, that's like not a church person? I hope all of you have had this experience at some point. It's really interesting when you do it because pretty early on in the experience, you will realize the distance between what they're understanding and familiar with and what you do. There's a whole bunch of words and traditions and systems that don't make sense to them. And so you find yourself kind of leaning over and whispering and explaining what's happening. And in church world, if we're not careful, we will become a very confusing place. It's why we try to explain things as much as we do. And I think the same kind of thing exists in our world. But the problem is the systems of sin in our world, we are all swimming in them all the time. No matter how kind of isolated you feel like you're living your life, we are all swimming in systemic sinism all over the place. It can be difficult for us to recognize because of it. But systemic racism has become one of those terms, right? And some of you, you're like, okay, that's line one, systemic racism. You said it, right? Systemic racism has become one of those terms, and what we've used it for is to weed out liberals from conservatives politically. And sometimes it feels like this, for some people, is the ultimate thing. Like systemic racism is unique, that this is the pinnacle sin of America, that there is no way for us to get sizably better at what we've faced, and that because of that, everything we see is indelibly marked by racism. And then there are some other people that say, no, systemic racism is just a ploy. What it is, actually, racism, we solved it decades ago. It doesn't exist anymore. And the only reason that someone uses it now is for political points, right? Have I made you uncomfortable yet? But the truth is that wherever you land in that conversation specifically, or in your politics more generally, the world has systemic sin all over it. So of course there's that, right? And over our two political extremes, they've promised equally impossible solutions to the problem that we would call sin. On the political right, we are promised a nostalgic view, like rainbows and unicorns of the past. And what happens is it ignores the great injustices of those moments in history. And on the political left, we are promised a utopianism, everything's perfect for everybody, that has never delivered its promises in human history, with very similar promises to the ones that are being proposed. When our politics become our religion, neither one can deliver. In an account of Jesus' life written by a very close friend and follower, Jesus talks to his friends about what was coming for them if they were really committed to staying connected to him in their daily lives within a world that looked different but had the same core problems as ours. Jesus says it this way. He says, if the world hates you, know that it has hated me before it hated you. If you were of the world would love you as its own. But because you are not of the world, but I chose you out of the world, therefore the world hates you. Now remember, we defined what world is a few minutes ago. He's not talking about people. He's talking about there is a system in this world that is opposed to you. And people are running on that operating system. Don't shift the enemy. Remember who your true enemy is. And the system that is working against your good and God's glory by redefining good and evil and promising purposeful life without the God who gives purpose. That's what we're all living in. And in this world, we need to understand that there is a fundamental incompatibility to this life that we're living as exiles in the middle of it. Jesus says that if you're a follower of Jesus, you will be hated. But the thing is, not only does Jesus offer this kind of like cheery outlook on our lives in this world, but his encouragement is that we don't have to do it alone. We have one another. And Jesus says, I was hated before you. It's one of the reasons that trying to follow Jesus on your own is so dangerous. As a matter of fact, when we live lives that look different than the systems of this world and we do it with one another, it is a marker that we are actually followers of Jesus. Now, just like last week, we have to add a qualifier that this isn't an excuse to be a judgmental, awkward, overly political, and weird Christian. Nobody likes that person. Don't be that person. This is an invitation that if we take the weight of Jesus seriously, we can see what's coming, both the pain in our moment at present and the promise of God's future for our world and for our lives. You know how the story ends, and you know that you have a God that's going to get you there. The other wrinkle in this passage from Jesus is that we were chosen by Jesus out of this world. We were adopted as sons and daughters into this new and better kingdom. Of course, that's going to create tension, right? But it should also give us an incredibly hopeful view that the God of the universe, who could pull you and me out of all of this, can keep you and me through all of this. Because make no mistake, we are in an increasingly post-Christian culture. It doesn't mean that we're in some sort of oppression like is existing around the world. Be careful as you try to like make yourself into a victim. That's not where we are, but we are in a post-Christian culture. As a matter of fact, I would say that we are going to be in an increasingly post-Christian culture. John Mark Comer defines post-Christian culture this way. He says, it's a cultural moment where the societal norms push you towards a vision that is a mix of Jesus and secular ideas, where we long for the kingdom without the king. And that is what's happening all over the place. We are seeing solutions, especially from our political extremes, that can never solve the problems of our world. Let me tell you about a couple of them just to make you uncomfortable. On the political left, kind of the most extreme solution right now comes from an extreme view of something called critical race theory. And if you've ever heard of this before, oftentimes it gets defined very, very specifically, but it's a much bigger category than that. It started in academia as a subset of something called critical theory, as a diagnostic tool to show how all of the systems of our nation and world are rooted in racism, and they all flow from the original sin of America, as described by them as racism and chattel slavery. Now, not everyone that holds to critical race theory believes what I'm about to say, but the most extreme version of this is that America cannot incrementally improve upon itself, that the improvements to end racism in our world have been insignificant, and that we need a societal reset to put things actually back in balance. That hasn't worked, and I would beg to you, right, it is not going to work. Now, not everyone that holds to critical race theory believes all that. So if you talk to somebody, you should have a conversation, listen to them, ask them what they think it means. And then on the political right, there's something that's become very, very popular, and we've seen it show up a whole lot in the last 20 years, and that's called Christian nationalism. And what that does is it seeks to baptize American history and make America uniquely God's nation, essentially a New Testament version of Israel. And what it does for Christians that hold to this view is it allows us to take our national history and our identity as Americans and sort of mix it. It's called syncretism. Mix it with what it means to be a citizen of heaven. And then looking at things like racism and slavery and current injustices in America, all of a sudden that feels not only unpatriotic, it feels unchristian. But we have to realize that we can be thankful for our nation and understand its faults, because our true citizenship is not here. We want to be great citizens here, but we want to understand where our true citizenship lies in heaven. If you want to learn more about any of that, we did a series on our daily Bible study that we do online called Daily Time with God, that we called Modern Heresies. And we talked about a whole bunch of these things. If you want to find it, you can go to ehills.org/weekend and click on weekend resources. It's linked there. But one of the subsets of critical race theory I want to spend just a minute talking about, because even if you've never heard of it before, you have felt it, is called intersectionality. And intersectionality, if you look at this diagram, will kind of show you a picture of what it means to understand how the world right now is thinking about voices and authorities. It is no longer connected, like in a side of modernism, to what you have to say and how it corresponds to truth or absolute truth or reality. Now, the greater your privilege, the lower your voice is, the less authority you really should kind of wield in what you say. And the lower your privilege and power is culturally, the more your voice should stand out. So I am a Caucasian, cisgendered, heterosexual male. I am at the pinnacle of social privilege according to this model. So you actually should probably all leave right now. Just, sit out. And vice versa, if you have kids right now and they're in school systems or they're trying to navigate this world through kind of unfettered access to social media, here's what you're probably feeling. They are wondering, hey, if this is how I get powerful, it's no longer how do I achieve over here or achieve over here. It's like, how do I find myself in a category of oppressed that I then can have a greater voice against the oppressor. So I just want to get maybe you've never heard that term or seen that before, but you are feeling it. And to understand that at the core of that, what that shows and reminds us of is that our world's operating system requires rejection, not just an election. This is not going to be solved by a different president, different Senate, or different House. I promise. It is only going to be perpetuated. Which leads us to our second challenge for today, which is rejecting self-made religion. Rejecting self-made religion. Recently, I was picking up a rental car when I was out of town. I was traveling to Atlanta. It was a great trip, first trip in a long time. And I don't know if this has ever happened to you before, but the gate agent that was there, it was very clearly if it wasn't their first day, it was like their second day. They were really struggling, and we were interacting. And at one point, as I'm trying to ask basic questions, and we're just doing you rent cars, I'm doing what you do. I feel like I'm not asking something different. At one point, I'm literally getting around the counter and looking at her screen with her. And I'm I think maybe we start with my name right there where it says name. Let's just try it, let's see what happens. And by the end of the interaction, I could tell she didn't know the answers to the questions that I was asking. They didn't have enough cars. They were really backed up. So I was let me just finish the transaction and I'll Google for the answers later, right? And it was frustrating because it was so obvious that they didn't know what they were doing. And our world is in the same position. We are just guessing at the way to connect with God, because we have rejected what he has revealed about himself. The way that we have solved for this gap between our view of God and purpose with our desire as a culture to move away from any sort of allegiance to him is a sort of spirituality that mixes Eastern thought and shifting cultural trends. And that's why it all of a sudden spiritually feels like just the new diet fad, doesn't it? Just whatever is current. And we've all seen the weight of the mob in our moment, right? On both sides, that people are canceled every day for violating the new moral standards of our culture that we have just invented ourselves. And to be fair, some of the historic abuses of marginalized people need to be corrected. They need to be addressed. But I think we can identify times on both sides of the political extremes where we have overcorrected. And it's actually not about making anything better. It's just about looking like we can associate with our tribes. It's called virtue signaling, and it's happening every day. The way that many of us as Christians, though, have addressed this is to become as fragile as the culture we are criticizing. We have the hope of heaven inside of us, but we run to the comments section and block people as fast as anyone in our lives. These are not new challenges. And while they definitely look different in our moment, they have been around for all of human history. There was an early church in the New Testament that struggled with some of the same things, and Paul wrote a letter to them trying to show them the pain that these systems can cause. It reads like this: if with Christ you died to the elemental spirits of this world, the systems that we're talking about, as if you were still, why do you live as though you're still alive in the world? Do you submit to regulations? Do not handle, do not taste, do not touch, referring to things that all perish as they are used, according to human precepts and teachings. There are specific philosophies that were being merged into biblical Christianity in the first century, where they were told to be really careful about what they handle, taste, and touch, with an overemphasis on exterior behavior and ignoring the heart condition. And if you remember, that's a whole lot of what Jesus was most concerned about during his earthly ministry. As a matter of fact, right, it sounds like a culture that's consumed with Instagram likes and how we look. Now people are afraid to be honest about what's really going inside, because they don't want to get canceled themselves. This statistic is from the beginning of COVID, so I'm sure it's more now, but at the beginning of COVID, there was a major analysis done, and 62% of respondents said that they aren't being honest about their political opinions because they're afraid of, if they were honest, and this is bipartisan, if they were honest, the impact that it would have on their relationships and job opportunities. We feel this, don't we? We know that there are certain things we can say and certain things we can't even say out loud. Just like so many of the voices and views in our day, Paul says that there is an appearance of wisdom and seriousness in these types of regulations, but they can't do what they are promising. We can change what's happening on the outside, but it will never go change the outside, change the inside. Like we talked about last week with all those practical steps, you have to let God in for it to change what's happening on the outside. Look, intellectually lazy and fake faith is everywhere right now. And while it will fill your mind and your schedule, it can never really satisfy your soul. You were made for more than the current spiritual fad or the ladder of legalism that everyone else is climbing in culture. Our culture basically has one big goal for you. I'm like reading the tea leaves for you. You want to know what our culture's goal is for you? Self-indulgence. Get what you want, when you want, however you want. And it isn't working. We find ourselves depressed, anxious, and lonely at a skyrocketing rate. And maybe for you, you're like, that's not really true for me, Phil. I don't really feel that. You know, I work really hard. I'm not self-indulgent. Maybe that's a place that you're rationalizing in your mind. Can I give you, if you're a parent, just a quick picture though? Like, what happens when your kids don't get what they want when they want it? Even kids that you go, they're in a good Christian home, we bring them to church, we talk to them about Jesus, we pray. Yeah, but you do that stuff for this amount of their day. And the rest of their day, the systems of this world are discipling them. They're training them. And what they're training them in is get what you want, when you want, how you want. And when you don't, freak out. And here's the thing, you go like, yeah, that's true. My kids do that sometimes. Not me though. Yeah, but like what happens when your Amazon package gets delayed a little bit? What happens when the thing that you're trying to watch online has to like buffer for a minute, right? What happens, and this is just a soapbox for me, if you show up at a restaurant today and there are 2 people working and it's going really slow, don't get mad at the 2 people who showed up for work today. Get mad at the 10 people who didn't. Just ask yourself the question. Am I really in a place where I understand I'm an exile in a foreign world, not entitled, but committed to following Jesus here? Or am I living out the world's view of self-indulgence? And this experience is violating that. And at the core of it, there's this redefinition of good and evil that's happening in our world. Because here's the thing, in our world right now, here's what's happened. Lust is now love. Contracts of convenience between people have replaced covenants of marriage. Porn and abortion are now seen as female empowerment. Gender now overrides biology. Greed has become the American way. Racism is seen somehow as a past issue, and Marxism is justice. And I know that some of you are like, oh, politically, I agree with some of what you just said, Phil, but politically, I disagree with other parts. That's the point. Jesus is not interested in our political categories. He's interested in our souls. He's interested in our eternity. Our world is at the spiritual rental counter with lots of words, but no answers. Jesus offers us a real invitation to a relationship that is only possible through his work for us. Our world's operating system requires our rejection, not just an election. You cannot live in compatibility to a system that is fundamentally incompatible with the way of Jesus, which leads us to our final idea today, which is embracing the moral minority. I've been talking about this for weeks at this point, but if you're a follower of Jesus, you are now in the moral minority. Again, be clear, this does not mean you are being persecuted. You should go see what is happening to followers of Jesus around the world. But for a long time, we lived in a culture that preferred Christians. We no longer live in that culture. You are now in the moral minority. It wasn't always that way, but here's the thing. I actually think it's a good thing. There is a reason that God still has us here. And even though the world is heading into an irreversible tailspin without God's direct intervention, there is still something we have on our plate. There's still a reason that God has you here. If you're a follower of Jesus, this is your daily truth in a world opposed to God. We pursue the true cause of God in the midst of a lost cause in global history to bring eternal life to the lost people in our lives. You're not responsible for how they respond. You are the messenger. You are the delivery person for the hope of heaven to the hurting people in this world. So how do we do that? Well, thankfully, we get a whole bunch of help from letters in the New Testament. But the Apostle Paul, a key leader and church planner in the church, he offers us these really challenging words to a church at Philippi, and it's gonna feel like he wrote them to 2021 right here. He says this, he says, do all things without grumbling or disputing. You guys know I know Greek, right? That word all, you know what it means? All. Do all things without grumbling or disputing, that you may be blameless and innocent, children of God without blemish in the midst of a crooked and twisted generation. Does that sound familiar? Among whom you shine as lights in the world, holding fast to the word of life. So in the day of Christ, I may be proud that I did not run in vain or labor in vain, even if I'm to be poured out as a drink offering upon the sacrificial offering of your faith. I am glad and rejoice with you all. Likewise, you also should be glad and rejoice with me. Crooked and perverse generation, right? Check. We got that. A church willing to hang on to his word and do everything without grumbling or complaining? Uh-oh. Hasn't it been interesting to watch how when we feel like we are right on an issue, we have rationalized that we can be wrong in our approach? That we go to the same kind of rhetoric, the same kind of mean-spirited gossip and slander, grumbling and complaining that our world does. Here's the thing though, the good news is that I don't think this is new. There's a reason it got written 2,000 years ago. It's the same challenges. And as the moral minority, just like the people that Paul was writing to, we can stand out as blameless and innocent, not sinless in our conduct, that's impossible, but that our lives would look so different that people would clearly see that there is still an option, there's still an alternative to not conform to the broken patterns that they see all around them. You get to be the alternative to the secular ethic that's leading people towards greater and greater hopelessness. You can provide an example of something that isn't easier, but so much better in Jesus. Because here's the thing, Paul's vision for his own life can kind of be summed up in these two concepts that we're going to talk about that are in complete contrast to self-indulgence. As he followed Jesus, here's what Paul wanted you and me to think about. Number one, self-discipline, which is doing what my flesh doesn't want. Like, I know it's bigger than what my flesh wants. I'm gonna do it anyway. And then self-control, which is not doing what my flesh does want. When we take a step back and we realize, like, wait a second, in our world, right, that's slavery, that's repression. But Paul says it's our path to real freedom that's worth rejoicing in. Letting God change us from the inside out, not trying to just address what's wrong on the inside with our own effort and work, letting him do it and letting it flow out. It's been said before that true freedom is not the absence of restrictions, but the presence of the right restrictions. If you think about a fish as it jumps out of the water and lands on the ground next to it, that fish is never as free as it is in that moment, and it is also going to die. I believe that we're in a cultural moment where we are watching our culture take gasps of breath from some of the very same ethics of Jesus that it lived out for many years in some version, and it's going to die. We can be people, exiles in the midst of that live with a different hope and that offer a different hope. Paul also provides this famous verse that ties to this one really well about our relationship to these systems of the world. He writes to the church at Rome, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable, and perfect. This world's systems are trying to conform you every day. I would even say they are deforming you every day. And it's a version of life that is getting heavier and harder to fulfill. And just when you think you've gotten it figured out, the system of this world pivots to a new ethic, a new cause, and you are left on the outside looking in. God's transforming power through Jesus, because of these truths that he provides, takes the pressure off to perform. It gives a consistent vision of human life and flourishing in him. And his grace provides you and me the power to walk it out and the forgiveness and grace for when we fail. It's kind of a long story why, but right now I'm borrowing a bunch of people's cars in my life. And something that I have to figure out every time I get in somebody else's car is the alignment is different, right? And so some cars pull a little bit to the left and some cars pull a little bit to the right. And some of them are pretty true. And you can't just make that assumption, right? If you start pulling out of the neighborhood, you're gonna hit another car before you get there if you don't adjust to what that is. And I think sometimes we live every day with our social media feed and with our email, with the expectations of our work and what we see on TV. We live as though the alignment is correct and we just go with the flow, but the alignment of our world is off. And so if you live an unintentional life, you're gonna get sideswiped. You're gonna get hurt and hurt other people. You have to live an intentional life. You have to be intentional to let God change you, not to conform to the patterns of this world. So for you, what is it that you are choosing to be transformed by? And what is it that you're choosing to be conformed by? If your flesh, right, last week, like we talked about, it drives you towards what it wants. What is the world around you trying to drive you towards in what it wants? It's definitely not what God wants for you. As a matter of fact, as Christians, we're gonna find ourselves kind of being pulled in two different directions here. You can already see it. You've been able to see it for years and years, but it's going to become louder and louder in our moment. That as we feel cultural power being moved out from Christians, you're gonna see some Christians take a subcultural approach. And what subcultural means is that we hide. It means that we kind of create little huddled communities of people that agree with us, especially in that kind of weird mix, right, of my political idea and my religious idea, and let's just get together and be safe and protected. I grew up in a church that was kind of subcultural. You said things like, don't smoke, drink or chew, don't hang out with girls that do, right? That's free, you can have it. That's subcultural. But the message of Jesus has always been countercultural. The message of Jesus was always, what does it look like for you to live and love the people of the world around you with the transforming message of Jesus? That you don't escape, you invest. It's different. But man, I'm telling you what, our world's operating system, it requires you and me to reject it. We can't just think that the next election is gonna solve it. We can't just think that if I can get a bigger voice in culture, everything will be all better. No, it takes you and me understanding where our true citizenship really is. And one of the things that I think is so important in our moment to realize is that sometimes in our world with its systems, we use the same word to mean different things. And we're using the word freedom a lot these days. And there's a difference. In the Bible, we are told about a freedom to. In our world, and especially in our nation, there's a lot of emphasis about freedom from responsibility, freedom from regulation and restriction, freedom from. But in the Bible, it's freedom to pursue God, freedom to serve people, freedom to live a transformed life. And so when you hear that word, make sure you are defining it with faith lenses first, not politics. Here's the thing. I'm not suggesting that you shouldn't be informed with what's going on in our world and in our nation. You shouldn't vote. You should. We just need to understand there's a difference between a president and a king. Our president has limited terms. Our king, the King of heaven, has served and will serve forever. In the Constitution, our president has limited authority and power on purpose. Our eternal king has unlimited power forever. So absolutely vote. Absolutely be engaged. Just remember who is who. You know, something that's interesting, you know that two of the greatest fears of our founding fathers, number one, was an uninformed voting population. And if you go look at what kind of in culture in general we know about what's happening, we've sort of nailed that one. The second one is they were worried about a political class that would be more concerned with maintaining their power than helping people. Maybe we confused it. We were like, what, are we supposed to do these? No, they didn't want that. And remember, I mentioned last week that I know that different ones of these enemies are gonna feel different. Some of these maybe don't feel like front burner issues for you. And for others of you today felt like, man, that is exactly what I've been wondering about and trying to put words to, and I hope it's helpful. Not to create a culture war, but for you to understand what it means to walk faithfully in a world that's walking away from God. But here's the thing, keep digging in, even if today wasn't the thing for you, as we explore our final enemy next week, especially since he's working behind the scenes to so much of what we've talked about so far. Can I pray for you? God, thank you. Thank you so much for the chance that we get to gather together this morning. That God, a unique freedom to worship, freedom to gather, freedom to seek you. Would you help us to understand our role in this world? You did not come to judge the world. You came to save it, God. And we get to be your hands and feet to help deliver that message. Would you help us to be faithful in that? Not to get in the mud with everybody else, but to be reminded that living different has always been the point. It's in Jesus' name. Amen.
Well, welcome back. I know a lot of what Phil just talked about can be hard to hear sometimes, and yet I think those are things that we absolutely need to hear. And so as you go throughout your week, what are those things that you're going to continue to think about? What are your takeaways from this message? You can drop those in the chat if you want, but Dustin, what is your takeaway?
Yeah, for me, I would say hearing the political parties, or I can even think about organizations or the entertainment industry are trying to push us away from God, and they promise a part of the salvation, but they can't actually deliver on that, and only Jesus can kind of fix and heal those underlying issues and bring meaning.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. For me, it's this idea that Phil kind of alluded to, where we want this kingdom. We want the promises that Jesus brings, the hope, the joy, the peace, but we don't necessarily want the king that goes with it, the king in Jesus, who's kind of over all of that stuff. And so what does it look like for us to both have the king and the kingdom? That's ultimately what Jesus came, and that's what he promised when he talks about that better life in Jesus, when we say Jesus makes life better. Not easier, but better. So we would love to hear from you, but even if you don't feel comfortable, I hope that you've got something that you're just going to be thinking about, that you're processing through. So, Dustin.
Yeah, hey, if you heard about Christmas Store at the beginning of this service, we kind of talked about being able to provide some gifts for families in our community. We'd love for you to be a part of that. You can go to ehills.org/weekend and find the list of gifts to pick up and drop off here or ship here by December 5th.
That's awesome. And we just want to thank you. If you're on our team that gives here, thank you for your generosity, whether it's the studio show that you just for partnering with us, or Mountain of Mercy that we talked about, our Thanksgiving food program, where we were able to give away about 870 meals to families in our community, or Christmas store. Thank you so much for the way that you give generously. If you want to know more about how to give here at Eastern Hills, or if you want to give right now, you can go to ehills.org/weekend and hit the give button. Well, I think we're going to wrap it up.
That's it.
I think this is it. So thank you so much for joining us. We have loved spending the morning with you. If you want to make sure that you never miss a live show, because we're going to be back next week, make sure you hit that subscribe button and have a great week. We look forward to seeing you next time.